moving on here and issuing a new threat. President Vladimir Putin warning today that Russia will develop new missiles if the United States leaves the key arms treaty. And we're joined to react by Ambassador Lincoln Bloomfield now, who served as a national security official under Presidents Reagan, Bush 41 and 43. And we're on a day in which we're reflecting on President Bush 41. It is interesting, Ambassador, to have a segment or a conversation that kind of brings up the concept of another arms race. But what do you think's, potentially at least, what's really happening here?
Well, I think what's really happening is something you've been hearing about from the Pentagon and, to a lesser extent, the White House on the National Defense Strategy, which is that there's a great power competition that we didn't pay much attention to while we were fighting terrorism in the Middle East in recent years. Russia and China have both become much more advanced. You've heard terms like gray war, hybrid war, and they're taking territories which are considered international waterways, both in the Sea of Azov and around Crimea, and at the same time, the South China Sea, in China's case. Right. And they're building up new capabilities, new weapon systems. Chinese have a blue water navy. The Russians have seized territory in Georgia in 2008 and then Ukraine. So they're on the march. And the United States, I think the Trump administration saw that the INF Treaty was being violated. They took the evidence to the Russians and said, here's what you're doing. These are clear violations. And they said, we're not going to, tie our hands behind our back if you're building these missiles. I think the question now is, what's the strategy with Russia? We can pull out of the treaty, but the Russians, as they just have said, okay, we're not going to be pushed around. We're going to see you one and raise you one, and that's a risk.
Well, let me ask you this. We're running quickly out of time as we come up in the top of the hour, and the way I'll ask it, as I wanted to get your reflections on President Bush 41 anyway, is how would he have handled something like this, do you think? Because, as you say, the Trump administration is effectively calling them out on it.
That's a hard question. I mean, my observation, I spent a year in the White House with Vice President Quayle. It was a very calm and deliberative place. There were a lot of smart people. They listened to each other. They didn't make fast decisions. They teased out all the possible outcomes. And I think they had a strategy and a sense of where they wanted to, what kind of an outcome they wanted to get to. So that's what you would do today, is you'd say, how do we come to some terms with Russia where they don't see it in their interest to be, sort of invading territory in Central and Eastern Europe, et cetera? How do we
make it think it's in their best interests, or make them want to feel that way?
Yeah, and just to put a tough aspect on it, you have to know where the soft tissue is and what their weaknesses are, so that we have leverage over them too. That's what we need to do now.
All right, we'll see how this one plays out, and we thank you for joining us today, Ambassador Bloomfield. Special day in the country to remember one of our presidents. Thank you, sir.